As well, Singapore as well close. But take a look at how we're setting up for the Japanese market. Opens Nikkei futures pointing to the upside after 5 sessions of gains, the longest winning streak since August. The Japanese yen holding an hour trading. Of course, we do have big Japan policy day, although not much for any change. All 54 surveyed economies expecting to hold the interest rate steady for a second straight meeting. 0.5%. Governor Ueda has pledged to be mindful of the high uncertainties given, of course, the ongoing trade uncertainty. Let's bring in Ayako Fujita, Chief Japan Economist at JP Morgan Securities. Ayako, always good to see you. The Bank of Japan prioritizing now perhaps some stability, given, of course, all of the tariff uncertainty?
Yeah, I think certainly BOJ has to pay attention to Liberalization Day, but before Liberalization Day tariff announcement, BOJ hinted the kind of possible upside risk of inflation. So it's kind of indicating a possible acceleration of the pace of rate hike. But with this uncertainty, BOJ does not necessarily have to accelerate. BOJ has to really focus on the uncertainty at this point.
The IMF also told them to just be flexible with your policy, right? Yes. And at least the Japanese yen has strengthened a little bit, so that gives them a little bit more leeway.
In that sense, yes. BOJ may not be pushed to deliver rate hike because from the currency market, and also current level of the currency is probably relatively favorable level for the Japanese economy because both for exporter and also domestic consumers. So in that sense, BOJ can really have a time to really assess whether or not they can really deliver rate hike at this point.
What hints do you expect to get from the quarterly economic report?
Yeah, I think BOJ has probably revised down their growth outlook, but probably BOJ will maintain the relatively positive outlook, at both potential growth rate probably around 1% level. But BOJ probably may not have to change inflation outlook, which is more important for BOJ's policy going forward.
Ayako, it's interesting you talk about this deliberately kind of modest behind the curve approach, right? And what's also been behind the curve ability of households and domestically in Japan to keep up with rising inflation, even with significant wage gains. Do you expect that gap to close, or is that something that the BOJ is sort of as concerned about as these broader global uncertainties?
I don't expect BOJ's deliberately modest behind the curve policy to change immediately, and particularly with this uncertainty, there's no reason for BOJ to rush. So BOJ will continue to to be relatively cautious in terms of timing of the rate hike. But still, the current level of the policy rate is quite accommodative because 50 basis point against 3% close to 3% inflation is actually quite accommodative. So I think BOJ still has likely to maintain their course that BOJ at least need to bring the policy rate around the neutral level, which is 1% at minimum.
Do you expect wage growth to continue being significant, and will that eventually, drive that ability for households and consumers to be able to keep up with inflation?
Yeah, that's clearly key factor for the economy and also inflation as well. And spring wage negotiation result we received so far is quite positive. So which means probably the wage run rate will continue to rise from the current run rate of around 3% level. So above 3% wage run rate is quite strong compared to BOJ's target of inflation rate of 2%. So which means probably I think inflation will continue to be relatively sticky, and also the economy will probably get supported from these recent wage gains.
We have seen really wild gyrations in the bond market as well, and of course the super long end of bond yields here in Japan also shooting to 2-decade highs or so.
Yeah.
Will we get a sense of what the BOJ is thinking about the functionality of the JGB market?
I think actually, BOJ is not particularly concerned about actually decentralized in the super long end of the curve, because clearly actually BOJ's intention to actually, as of last year, actually start to create intention to start QT was actually, bringing back actually market functionality, which means actually more volatility in the market and probably actually high rate compared to actually the YCC period. So in that sense, actually, BOJ may not have a clearly actually, strong intention to intervene the market, even with the recent actually spike in the super end of the longer end of the curve.
Eike, what are the expectations when it comes to how the yen sort of plays into a lot of these questions, right? Because exporters have been getting a little bit more respite, but there's so much volatility around where the US dollar expectations are at the moment.
I think actually, in terms of level-wise, actually probably around 140 level is more favorable level for actually, even for exporters. And also actually, of course, actually, exporters are more concerned about actually potential weakening of global demand, which is actually quite painful. But currency-wise, actually, 140 is not very painful level because actually still actually, Japanese yen is relatively very much competitive actually against other countries. So I think actually, and also on the flip side is actually clearly actually 140 is probably favorable level for domestic consumers because last year domestic consumer has suffered a lot with actually weak yen and also actually also actually quite strong actually import price actually inflation. So in that level, I think actually in that sense actually the current actually currency is not particularly concerning factor for Japanese economy as well as actually BOJ's. And also, actually, in terms of actually trade talk, I think clearly actually currency stability was an issue, and actually the kind of talk between U.S. and Japan will continue. And clearly, actually, the kind of broader agreement is maintain stability of the currency, which means actually we will not actually both U.S. and Japan may not prefer to have a kind of experience we experienced last year, like 150 or 160 level. So in that sense, actually, if BOJ doesn't deliver rate hike or BOJ will not maintain actually the course of policy normalization, we will potentially have a risk that the currency starts to depreciate again. So to avoid these kind of things, actually, of course, actually, this is also one of the factors for BOJ to need to stick on the course of policy normalization.
It was interesting because we did have that line talking about the yen being more likely to affect the inflation outlook in the previous report. And I guess should we be watching for more nuance around how they treat that because the direction of the yen has obviously changed since then and there's a great deal of uncertainty as to, where it goes from here.
One thing is actually because the question is actually whether or not actually inflation response to the currency is asymmetric or symmetric. And actually, because, of course, actually, when yen depreciate a lot, actually, we clearly see, and also BOJ clearly see the kind of stronger, actually, the pass-through, from currency to inflation. But actually, because actually, there are still a lot of carried over, actually, the inflation pressure in the domestic economy. So even if actually, even the currency appreciate a little bit, actually, because, we don't think actually, that this will actually have a significant impact on inflation to dragging down going forward.
Ayako Fujita, Chief Japan Economist at JP Morgan Securities. Really good to have you with us on BOJ Day. Of course, you can find out more about the decision later. Subscribers can go to the function TLIV Go. We do have an alert on the Bloomberg right now. We are getting the latest coming from both Seven & i Holdings as well as Alimentación Couche-Tard. Seven & i now saying that the detailed terms of an NDA remain confidential, as Couche-Tard has also confirmed that they have signed an NDA with Seven & i, progressing these talks forward. Alimentación confirms that the company has an NDA. Remember, we continue to follow these operating stores is in structuring to boost shareholder target of payout by Alimentación Couche-Tard Inc. Couche-Tard now saying that they appreciate Seven & i's following these discussions, 7 has provided access diligence from 7 and 9 side. The statement coming out saying there are you that means a top priority for the I say they remain committed to pursue